Is North Korea about to enter the war in Ukraine? In October 2024, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky announced that North Korean forces were preparing to join Russian troops in the fight against his country, coming just months after Moscow and Pyongyang signed a mutual defence pact. All this has prompted fears that the Ukraine war is taking a dangerous new turn. But why exactly is North Korea supporting Russia? And is it really about to become a new force in the Ukraine war? Hello and welcome. If you're new to the channel, my name is James Ker-Lindsay, and here I take an informed look at international relations, conflict, security and statehood. While alliances are an integral part of international relations, the reasons behind them can be extremely varied. Sometimes they may be based on shared ethnic, linguistic or religious ties, or on shared ideological values. At other times, they may arise from common historical bonds or even a common adversary. Likewise, economic and political interests can also play a crucial part. A country may ally with another state for financial gains or to advance its strategic goals. But whatever the underlying factors bringing countries together, alliances can often have far broader effects, regionally or perhaps even globally. A good example is the emerging alliance between Russia and North Korea. Following their most recent summit in June 2024, the two countries signed a mutual defence pact that many now see as paving the way for a significant expansion of military relations between them. While this has already seen North Korea supply arms and ammunition to Russia, there are suggestions that North Korean troops will soon join Russian forces on the front lines in Ukraine. But just what exactly is driving this new alliance? The origins of Russia-Korea relations can be traced back to the mid-17th century when Russian explorers first entered the Korean peninsula. However, it wasn't until the late 19th century that the modern relationship emerged. As the Russian Empire expanded eastwards, it became increasingly involved in the intensifying power struggles in East Asia. As Korea tried to maintain its independence in the face of growing pressure from Japan and China, Russia saw its opportunity to extend its influence and secure a warm water Pacific port. In addition to trade agreements, it began providing military assistance to Korea. However, Russia's defeat in the Russo-Japanese War of 1904 to 1905 ended these ambitions as Japan became the dominant power. In 1910, it annexed Korea. Japan's occupation would last for the next 35 years until it was forced to withdraw following its defeat in the Second World War. Against the backdrop of the emerging Cold War, Korea was now divided along the 38th parallel between the United States and the Soviet Union. In 1948, Moscow oversaw the creation of the Communist Democratic People's Republic of Korea, the DPRK, or North Korea, as it's more commonly known. Led by Kim Il-sung, who'd spent several years in the USSR, the country adopted a socialist system closely modelled on the Soviet Union. This Soviet support would then play a vital role in 1950 when North Korean forces invaded the US-backed Republic of Korea. However, as the South fought back with international support, North Korea was forced to retreat until Communist China came to its aid. After 3 years of brutal fighting, the Korean War ended where it began, with a ceasefire along the 38th parallel. Although Soviet aid continued to flow into North Korea over the following decades, the relationship began to change. As North Korea sought to avoid becoming another Soviet satellite and given Chinese support during the war, it began pivoting between Moscow and Beijing. The end of the Cold War and the collapse of the Soviet Union presented a massive challenge for North Korea. As Soviet trade and aid suddenly stopped, its economy was heavily weakened. Meanwhile, China used the opportunity to consolidate its ties to the North, thus becoming its most important ally. However, things began to change again at the turn of the millennium. Under its new president, Vladimir Putin, Russia reconsidered its approach to the Korean peninsula. Recognising the strategic importance of maintaining influence in the region, Moscow began rebuilding its ties to Pyongyang. In July 2000, just months after coming to office, Putin visited North Korea for talks with the country's leader, Kim Jong-il, the first visit by a Russian leader since the fall of the USSR. From there, Russia and North Korea went on to establish a complex relationship. While Moscow supported international sanctions against North Korea over its nuclear program, it also pressed for international engagement with Pyongyang and opposed overly punitive measures that could undermine the regime. Indeed, Russia became one of North Korea's few economic partners, often providing essential goods and services. I hope you're finding this useful. If so, please consider giving it a like and perhaps subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. It all really helps. Thanks so much, and now back to the video. But while relations between the two countries had been steadily improving, the turning point came in 2014. As ties to the West collapsed after Russia annexed Crimea, Moscow sought to build new international partnerships, including with North Korea. Building on these foundations, the critical moment came in early 2022 when Russia invaded Ukraine. Although many expected it to win a quick and decisive victory, the Russian military was soon pushed back by Ukrainian forces. As its weapons and ammunition ran low and facing international sanctions, Moscow turned to Pyongyang for help. Aside from its vast arsenal of Soviet-era weaponry, North Korea also manufactured ammunition. In September 2023, Putin and the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un held a summit to discuss wide-ranging cooperation. As Kim announced that Russia was now his country's very first priority, relations strengthened considerably. This was highlighted when the two sides met again in North Korea for another summit just 9 months later in June 2024. Marking Putin's first visit to the country in over 2 decades, the summit was capped by the announcement that Moscow and Pyongyang had signed a mutual defence pact. While observers have since debated precisely what the agreement means in real terms, what seems clear is that North Korea is now supplying Russia with large amounts of arms and ammunition, including missiles. And it's against this backdrop that Ukraine is now suggesting that North Korea is preparing to take a dramatic new step by providing ground troops to support Russian forces. At this stage, it's important to stress that the exact situation remains unclear. While some reports indicate that North Korean troops may already be operating in Ukraine, other reports suggest that this hasn't in fact happened yet. Instead, soldiers are currently being trained in Russia. Of course, some will dismiss the reports as nothing more than Ukrainian scaremongering, arguing that Zelensky is merely trying to scare the West into more support. That said, many analysts, including South Korean observers, believe that the reports are in fact accurate, especially as there have been other signs that something serious is going on. For instance, there's recently been a dramatic escalation of tensions along the border between North and South Korea. This has seen the North blow up roads and railways. And amidst northern claims that the South has been flying drones over Pyongyang, bizarre stories have emerged of North Korean balloons carrying rubbish flying across the dividing line. In its strange way, all this may well be North Korea warning South Korea and its Western supporters not to consider taking advantage of its decision to help Russia attack Ukraine. However, if the reports are indeed correct and North Korea is preparing to send troops to Ukraine, this will raise many important questions. First, there's the issue of why Russia would want North Korean forces and why Pyongyang would want to supply them. From Moscow's perspective, the answer is seemingly straightforward. As the casualty rates from the war grow, it needs reinforcements. However, as it depletes its manpower from outlying regions, it faces the politically costly prospect of mobilising young men from Moscow and St. Petersburg. This may start to shift Russian public opinion against the war. To this end, an influx of North Korean troops would undoubtedly be very welcome. But it also comes with risks. For a start, it would mark a significant escalation in the conflict. Whether North Korea openly declares its position, Ukraine will now be facing two opponents. Many in the West will call for more direct support for Ukraine, perhaps leading to calls for NATO to reassess its position on sending ground troops to the country, as raised by the French President Emmanuel Macron in early 2024. But even if NATO doesn't go that far, and many members are likely to oppose such a radical step, it could still see current restrictions lifted on the supply of more powerful and sophisticated weapons for Ukraine. In this sense, a relatively small contingent of North Korean troops could make the war even more difficult for Moscow. Then again, perhaps Russia is banking on an escalation to heighten international calls for a ceasefire. But while many see Moscow as the real force behind the recent arrangements with North Korea, there are obvious benefits for Pyongyang as well. On the one hand, there are economic advantages. The deals will bring in significant income and provide the country with other resources. But there's also an important strategic and military dimension. Given that Pyongyang is trying to develop its rocket and satellite program, it didn't go unnoticed that the June 2023 summit was held at a Russian space center. More generally, it will see the dangers posed to its wider position if Russia is defeated in Ukraine, especially if this were to lead to regime change. But as is the case for Russia, the arrangement also carries costs for North Korea. For example, many will see North Korean troops as little more than expendable cannon fodder to be used by Moscow. However, this is unlikely to pose little concern for Pyongyang. For a regime with little regard for its population, the broader economic, political, diplomatic and strategic benefits will outweigh these human costs. Then there's China. A full-blown alliance between Russia and North Korea could severely undermine its influence over Pyongyang. Despite the close ties that exist between Beijing and Moscow, there have been suggestions that China is less than happy with the developments between Russia and North Korea. As China remains an important benefactor, this could potentially carry costs for North Korea if it's seen to be getting too close to Russia. In the meantime, regardless of whether the North does in fact send troops, there's little doubt that the growing alliance between Russia and North Korea represents a significant development on many different levels. For a start, it could yet change the course of the war in Ukraine. Already, North Korea is boosting Russia's supply of arms and ammunition, helping its position in the war. Then again, the Defence Pact has also prompted South Korea, a major arms producer in its own right, to consider providing weapons to the Ukrainian government. At the same time, the alliance could also pose a fundamental danger to peace and security in the Korean Peninsula and East Asia in general. In addition to strengthening North Korea's technological know-how, it'll boost its confidence. If nothing else, this will almost certainly make efforts to tackle North Korea's nuclear program even more difficult to manage. It'll also represent a major step forward for North Korea's ballistic missile program, representing an ever greater threat to Japan and even to the United States. Beyond this, if North Korea does send its forces to Ukraine, it'll inevitably represent a crucial new development. The question is, what happens then? North Korea's decision to openly enter the war will inevitably raise questions about the increasing internationalisation of the conflict and lead to very real debates about whether the West should be doing more to help Ukraine. Then again, a substantial contribution from North Korea may well force many in the West to ask whether escalating the war further will have become just too serious to risk. I hope you found that useful. If so, here are some more videos that you might find interesting. Thanks so much for watching, and see you in the next video.